And on the surface, it's quite easy to say, well, he's founded LADBible, UniLad, a stereotypical success, but I've also been in hospital with, a nurse telling my parents that if I had one more alcoholic drink, I wouldn't have made it.
Do you have a barometer of the fact that actually it's almost like a parallel way to be an entrepreneur? It's almost like you're almost guaranteed to have ADHD.
It certainly seems to be a concentration of people who have ADHD that are starting businesses. And I truly believe that when someone with ADHD finds something that aligns with their core, you don't have a deficit, you have an abundance of attention towards that thing.
A lot of people would just think that's it, cracked it.
Don't need
to work again. Your inner demon is saying you've still got to qualify yourself, you've still got to prove, you've still got to, which is different to neurotypical.
We shapeshift and we copy each other's interest base, mannerisms, in order to be more likable or palatable for whoever we're stood in front of. And that's the tragic part of it all. It's about accepting that you are brilliant, you might just not know it yet.
Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
That all sounds a bit staid, doesn't it? Last time I interviewed you live on stage at a festival, which brought us together, strangely enough, and here we are full circle. I started off and I wondered how to start off an interview with you because you've got such a media presence yourself, and congratulations on that. It really is a huge success. I'm going to probably go back to the same place. If we think about the UniBible and all the social media success you've had, it's very easy to put you on a very high pedestal and say that is a self-made man that succeeded and how easy his life is and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I now know, but suspected then that underneath that, you've been round the loop a few times with challenges, with neurospicy, neurodiversity, divergence, call it what we will. And I'd like us, if we can, the three of us, to discuss what it's like underneath that skin, what it's like underneath the hood of the real Alex Partridge. How's that?
Well, it can be chaotic. I always said my mind is like 10 highly caffeinated squirrels barreling around. And on the surface, it's quite easy to say, well, he's founded LADBible, UniLad, stereotypical success. But I've also been in hospital with, a nurse telling my parents that if I had one more alcoholic drink, I wouldn't have made it. So there's been some real challenges that anxiety has created, and the things I put around myself as a business person to avoid criticisms and rejections got me into a lot of trouble. The thought of when I wasn't aware that I was living with ADHD, and I didn't know how irrational my fear of criticism and rejection was, and therefore how much of a people pleaser I was, and how much I didn't say or didn't know how to say no to certain business situations. That got me into a lot of trouble. Like that made me sign a bit of paper I shouldn't have signed, which triggered a court case, which triggered alcoholism. And it all stems back to that horrible thing called RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, which can be a real debilitating thing for so many. I didn't know that was part of my story, this horrible thing called RSD. And if I had done, I could have put strategies in place earlier that would have enabled me to put boundaries in place and learn how to say no.
When you first saw us on stage having a conversation that has ultimately led to being here today, what attracted you into the conversation, do you think?
Well, I think it's probably important to say it was Ideas Fest, which is an entrepreneur's hub. So I'm there as an entrepreneur, you're both there as an entrepreneur, and you're in a marquee that I can't get into because there's so many people already inside. And there's a massive storm coming, proper rainstorm. So I'm listening, and I heard enough to know that there was part of the conversation that I heard wasn't just of interest to all the people in front of me, but it was interesting to any entrepreneur. And that's who was there. So I had to leg it to get away from the storm, and that's where ultimately we connected. But from an entrepreneurial point of view, there are so many people that I have met, you continue to meet, that seem to ultimately have the synergy with ADHD and neurospicy. And I just wondered, we've obviously got to know each other separately through other things and then come together today. Is that a trend? Do you have a barometer of the fact that actually it's almost like a parallel way to be an entrepreneur? It's almost like you're almost guaranteed to have ADHD.
It certainly seems to be a concentration of people who have ADHD that are starting businesses. I think people with ADHD, you're kind of at a lower level baseline dopamine anyway. So we're very good at starting things. It's in our nature. Like, we are starters. We're very impulsive. And if you turn that into a positive, you do things that a lot of people might be too fearful to do. And that involves starting businesses. I think the difference between someone with ADHD who starts something, buys the domain, gets very excited, but then abandons it, and the consequential low self-esteem stuff that comes with that, versus someone with ADHD who starts something, sticks at it, and becomes a world-beating entrepreneur at that thing. I truly believe it's self-awareness, and it's understanding what is a good fit for your inner self and what isn't. I've always said that I don't think ADHD is a deficit of attention. I truly believe that when someone with ADHD finds something that aligns with their core, you don't have a deficit, you have an abundance of attention towards that thing once you find it. And that's when the ADHD person will become the best in the world at that thing. I think because of years and years and years of masking and pretending and shape-shifting, because of an intrinsic feeling of being a bit different, many of us don't have an idea of who we really are. Our self-awareness is really low. I think it's a deficit of self-awareness. So when something comes into our now, a new job, a new relationship, a new business idea, we just get very excited and we say yes to that thing before we really understand if it's a good fit for who we really are. A lot of the time, if you don't have an awareness of who you really are, it won't be. And when the honeymoon period passes, that's when you'll quit. You'll leave that relationship. That domain will join the domain of the graveyard of domains. That
I've heard you talk about this before, yeah.
I think it's so important to build that arsenal of self-awareness so you have an understanding of who you really are. So when something does come into your now, you have data points within yourself to compare and to see if it is aligned with the points of that opportunity. Therefore, you can make better decisions that are a better alignment. And that's when you won't quit.
Purpose as well. You look at the purpose behind you setting up ADHD 360. And I want to bring up ADHD Chatter. There's a real purpose there. So that distraction, and I'm guilty of this, like I sort of have a conversation with, we could do this together, we could do that. And then I'm like, I've got to have the self-awareness and the discipline to say, no, if I want this to go as far as I want it to, I've got to concentrate on it. When did you lock in on wanting to build what is a phenomenal community and a business opportunity as well with the podcast?
So for me, it was the injustice of when I realized what the general narrative around what it meant to live with ADHD was and how I compared that to my own experience. And there was such a juxtaposition between what those two things were. Like, to really set the point, before my ADHD diagnosis and after selling the social media companies, I was in a bit of a void, and I had this mask on that I was a business person. So I wanted to start this podcast called Walk Away Wiser. It was going to be a business podcast to interview business people. And I fell in that trap that many people do. I stayed up all night. I bought the domain. I spent a fortune on cameras. I turned my bedroom into a soundproof studio. And then the postman delivered all of the cameras 3 days later. And I had lost interest in the idea. And I was just sat there looking at all of these boxes from Amazon in total confusion. I couldn't understand why I was so excited 3 days ago. And now 3 days later, I have no interest. But that's what I mean. I was not acting off pure intrinsic motivation. I was acting on a short-term dopamine spike based off a masked persona of me, which at that stage was this business person. But I'm not. When I got my ADHD diagnosis, I looked up what it means to have ADHD, and it said that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by traits of impulsivity and forgetfulness and disorganization, and that it was always going to be a life of struggle. And that triggered something inside of me, the injustice, because yes, those things are there 100%, but you also have to acknowledge that when you understand ADHD and you can put things around you, scaffolding to support the challenging aspects. ADHD is also creativity and pattern recognition and being great in a crisis and being resilient and loyal and entrepreneurial. That triggered this fire inside of me that wanted to make as much noise about ADHD as possible to flatten and to balance the narrative around what it actually means. So when a child gets a diagnosis and they're looking up, what is this thing that I've been diagnosed with, rather than just reading that they're disordered and life's going to be hopeless and a constant journey of struggle, they might see a bit of content from me or someone else that has echoed that message, and realize that they're not broken, they're just different, and that there is a huge amount of hope once they understand themselves.
You're not going to run out of passion for that, are you?
No, not at all. When I spoke with you last time in the summer, there was a story of, if I can call it failure, part of you getting to be who you became, who you are, which really resonated with me at the time. And I explored it, but I want to explore it again. And that's, you to me, as I was sat there interviewing you, you were the first Deliveroo. You remember that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So something that's now every day that people use all the time. Go back to university, buying a freezer. Tell us that story and take us through that story if you can, because it fascinates me, this story. Because again, I'm keen for people to understand that to get to being where you are, to being the success you are, you've had your knocks, you've had your kicks, and that should not put us off.
Oh, 100%. You know, LADBible, UniLad, now ADHD Chatter, 3 businesses that have been a success, but there have been 30 others that haven't. And the one you're talking about is one of those. And it was my first year of university. I'd just gone to my first lecture. I had my first anxiety attack in the classroom when I was 6 years old. So going to that lecture triggered that anxiety. I stood up, I left the university lecture theatre, went back to my bedroom where I was calm and not overstimulated. And I had an idea to create a late night pizza delivery company. And I called it Quick Pizza. And I impulsively spent about half my student loan on this huge, giant freezer, about half the size of this table, massive thing. These 2 delivery guys sort of like just squeezing it into my bedroom in Oxford. And I filled it with frozen pizzas from the supermarket. And I made a Facebook page called Quick Pizza. The idea was really simple. If you wanted a pizza in the middle of the night after all of the shops had shut, you'd message the Quick Pizza Facebook page. I'd put your pizza in the oven. I had 4 students cycling around Oxford in the middle of the night. But then the university shut me down because I didn't have a food safety hygiene certificate. So that was it. And that kind of happened simultaneously with me realizing that I was bored of the idea too. It's a classic, you know, super excited, did a lot in a short amount of time. Within about 3 days, I'd gone from idea to having 4 people delivering pizzas in the middle of the night. But then because it wasn't aligned with like what I cared about, you know, it turns out I don't actually care about solving the late night food delivery problem.
Yeah.
The dopamine ran out and I quit.
I just think it's a great story of an opportunity that didn't become what it could have become, but you carried on and you progressed. I don't know the answer to this question, and it's not asked with any agenda. Did you finish university?
No, I left after, so I failed the first year, and then I decided to retake the first year, but didn't go to another lecture, and essentially they kicked me out after my second year.
Okay. So again, there's a core message there, isn't there? Because you're I just find you incredibly intelligent. The ability to apply that, or for a setting to allow you to find a way for you to apply that intelligence to learning, didn't facilitate your graduation, did it? How do you learn? Because you clearly do learn. What's Alex Partridge's learning style?
Certainly not any sort of stereotypical way that society would judge a child on.
Yeah.
I didn't do very well at school. Like many neurodivergent kids don't. I think school is a trauma factory for a lot of ADHD kids, from speaking to many. I learn by doing, but only when it's aligned with something I'm genuinely really interested in. Like, again, it goes back to that. I don't think ADHD is a deficit of attention. I think it's about finding what it is that you want to learn about.
Russ Barkley calls it, and has discussed it many times, it's not about attention and intention. It's about not being able to focus on what you need to be able to focus on. But when the penny drops, when you get your island of competence, Bob Brooks, then it becomes all-encompassing to the expense of others. and that hyper focus, as some people would call it.
Yeah, a mixture of passion and purpose. Makes you formidable.
Yeah. And the capability of a person with ADHD to then be resonant and say and not even say that's my focus, because there isn't the articulation, isn't there? That says there's a pause, time to think about it. There isn't that pause and time to think about it. It's just, I'm on with this and I'm doing it. And I guess that's where the success came for you. Well, with the social media, the first two, where do you think your ADHD was a strength for you? That I dislike superpower, because I think the struggles you need to get through to get to being the applicant of that strength. Superpower doesn't work. We're not Superman that puts underpants on wrong on the outside of our trousers and everything's well. There's a hardship to get there, and I personally don't like to downplay that hardship. But what were your strengths? The clear question that made those social media things a great, tremendous success for you.
I think being always living in the now has really benefited me, and especially at that juncture. And what I mean by that is, well, it's things that are in the future and in the past, because of object permanence, they kind of, for me, just fade into, they don't exist. So some people might start a business and it, for whatever reason, doesn't work out, and that can really pause their trajectory as an entrepreneur because they can't get over it. Whereas for me, it wasn't a case of getting over it, it just didn't exist. So the many failed businesses that happened prior to discovering social media that failed, I didn't dwell on those failures and I didn't let that kind of bog me down. So I actually think that aspect of ADHD, and I think what causes that is, again, this constant like living in the now, being alert, like a tiger, because of all of those horrible negative comments that I had as a child. When I was a kid, someone said, you could be one of the cool kids, Alex, if you weren't so weird. That's one of many that I think has created this adult that is very wide-eyed, always alert, constantly living in the now. So I don't waste time dwelling about past failures, and therefore I don't let them bog me down. So I think that is a massive strength that enabled me to just focus on the now when I discovered social media. I think pattern recognition was huge, because you have to be able to see what has performed well, especially on a platform like social media that is governed by an algorithm. You have to be able to analyze and really look at why that bit of content did well or why it did badly, and then adjust going forward. And creativity, again, having the confidence within myself to just go for it and to not kind of be held back by external pressures to do or conform to a traditional style of education, and just being creative and problem solve my way out of that standard that was
proper entrepreneurial. That is,
it is, and
entrepreneurial.
It is not conform. Let's not conform. Let's innovate. And I guess I was going to use the word lucky, but I think that's disparaging. I don't think that's fair, because I think the movements you created came about because social media was growing at that time that you were growing with it. But I also think you promoted the growth of social media in terms of those messages. I think you weren't lucky that social media was there. You saw social media. And when I look at what you've achieved, I think you helped define what social media can do. And I don't think that's acknowledged enough when we look back at the two big successes you had, because now there's lots of pretenders to that crown, aren't there, of let's put out good, entertaining, quick stuff for people.
If you look at the ADHD Chatter, the community element, the force for good, so social media can get a bad rep, and if you are doom scrolling and watching stuff that's not in any way educational or helpful, one of the things that I've really enjoyed following your content, the amount of people that are coming to ADHD Chatter to learn about the scientific side of things, learn from a lived experience with them. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, with your own lived experience, your own journey, with the professional people you get involved, let alone the lived experience, is there like an overwhelming thing that needs to change? You're very data driven, so you've probably got part of your brain going, gosh, another person saying that, another person. What are the things that really stand out that ultimately need to be changed?
within the community, I think it's
almost like a cry for help. Is there any one thing where, like, this is the segment of people, or this is, you know, the education system, one size fits all? Is there one thing where you're like, gosh, there's a real crisis there?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's how people with ADHD talk to themselves. That's the thing that needs to change. So many people I speak to, they get a diagnosis of ADHD and they put so much effort into trying to make themselves neurotypical. They put so much effort into making themselves fixed. And I think that's the main thing that needs to change. It's that energy is so misplaced because you're not broken, you're just different, therefore you don't need to be fixed. And I think that energy can be better placed in putting work into discovering who you really are underneath, for the reasons we spoke about earlier. Because when you put so much effort into changing who you are, it's exhausting, and you don't have any energy to go towards things that you are brilliant at, you just don't know it yet. And B, it pulls you away from having meaningful relationships because you spend so much energy shape-shifting. I say people with ADHD, we're the world's best actors. If there was an Academy Award for playing a character called Normal, we would be up on stage collecting that award every single year. We're chameleons. We shape-shift and we copy each other's interest base, mannerisms, in order to be more likable or palatable for whoever we're stood in front of. And that's the tragic part of it all. Like, that's the thing that needs to change. It's about accepting that you are brilliant. You might just not know it yet, and stop trying to fix yourself. Because I think so much energy goes into trying to fix yourself. That inner critic can be so strong. You convince yourself through internal and external messaging that there's something wrong with you, but there's nothing wrong with you. You're just slightly different to what you thought was quote unquote normal. And that inner critic is really, really wrong.
It's controlling the voices in the head, isn't it? And the narrative that's coming from, whether it's been authority or what you were told at school, you're thick. How much of that's going to, I can resonate with that. The other thing is you've got a pebble that you're spinning and fiddling with it now.
Thumbstone.
Talking about fixing and kind of coping mechanisms. So there's a mindset element, and then there's the sort of physical kind of fidgeting and distraction, if you like. What works for you, and what would you see and recommend in so many people you get to meet that is a kind of a coping mechanism that helps with people with ADHD?
Without a doubt, for me, is trying to always incorporate movement, and that's how I do that when I'm doing sit-down interviews or on stage. Exercise in the morning is for me like a must. The trajectory of my day, if I don't get movement in at the beginning of it, is considerably different. Not just in terms of productivity, but focus, how I feel about myself. And if I can't do that, because some days, life happens and I just can't be bothered, then I try and just do 5-star jumps in front of the mirror, and I try and keep that going throughout the day. Alcohol for me has been the biggest change. I mean, I've had to stop drinking because I'm the type of alcoholic that if I have one drink, I will be blackout drunk within half an hour and it'll kill me. But if you're not that, the consequences of that is that my ADHD positives have massively increased, and the effects that alcohol has, which I think really mutes the positives, has just completely gone. So for anyone listening, I would really like cutting out or reducing alcohol is such a massive shift.
How do you do with things like, it's a personal question, you don't have to go there, caffeine and caffeinated drinks? Do you go there?
Yes, I do. Yeah, for my sins, probably a little bit too much.
Go on, talk to me about that.
So I don't take ADHD medication. I probably do self-medicate through caffeine. I wake up and I have 2 cups of coffee within kind of like 45 minutes, but then I really have about 5 to 6 coffees a day. And if I'm about to do something, then I might neck a coffee. Like, that's probably my vice, if you like. So
pretty tame compared to some other things that we talk to people about. So,
well, that's good.
It is. And I didn't know the answer to the question, but I suspected when you talked about the alcohol, you talk about the way you get passionate and then the hobby graveyard and those kind of things, that there'd be something in there that would be that self-medication route for you, and I suspected that caffeine, with the alcohol being out now, I suspected caffeine. Could you give that up, do you think? I'm not asking you to, or do you think that is your medication route, for want of an expression?
If I'm totally honest, I think I would be able to. I woke up this morning and I realised I only had decaf in the flat, and I had a panic. So that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
But I had a decaf coffee, probably placebo, has some caffeine in it. And then I got to the station to get the train up here, and I instantly kind of like was super excited to go to the coffee shop and get a coffee. Like, that is an addiction. I genuinely felt quite panicky when I realised I didn't have any coffee in the flat this morning. But could I give it up? Probably.
I'm genuinely not asking you to, and I don't want you to think that there was an agenda to that question. One of the things about people with ADHD, and I wanted to ask it in one of the earlier interviews that we've done, but we didn't get there, is that people with ADHD can easily be addicted to something. And when we talk about hyperfocus, that's an addiction. You're getting that some people would call it an adrenaline rush. For the ADHD community, we call it a dopamine spike, wouldn't we? And whatever it is that addiction is that's giving that rush, if it's a healthy thing and a healthy product that comes out of it, then that's a good thing. Alcohol, less of a healthy thing, less of a good thing that comes out of it. Your caffeine, your word, addiction to caffeine, it's not the end of the world, is it, to drink caffeine? Where do you think your lifestyle also feeds that addiction dopamine spike? Work or whatever? Because you're at one, you seem at one, that's a better way of putting it, and balanced, you seem balanced. But you've obviously had times where you weren't. So what's this version of Alex Partridge doing to satisfy that need for addiction in different things in a good way?
I think having a focus with the work that I'm doing and the podcast, it gives me somewhere for those thoughts to go. I've always had the unhealthy sources of dopamine under control until the thing that I'm managing the dopamine with gets taken away. With my first company, that got taken from me, and I was in hospital the next day because and I didn't realize why, but my dopamine, my hyperfocus was in the company, and when that got taken away, my source of dopamine was stolen from me, and I knee-jerk reactioned, went and got it from a bottle. I have that awareness now to be really, really careful that the boundaries I put in place protect me or will give me notice if my source of dopamine gets taken away, which is now the podcast. But I think you can definitely be addicted to your business. I think that's why I think you have to be, in a sense.
It goes back to the entrepreneurial, doesn't it? Because we always talk about the entrepreneurial, often talk about the entrepreneurial link of the impulse side of ADHD, if you will. We will go and try this. I am going to do it. I'm not going to procrastinate. I am going to do it. We also talk about ADHD as procrastinators. So there is a conflict there. But then the part to bring out, and I think your success brings it out, which is why I've gone there, is the satisfaction of an addiction by doing something entrepreneurial and being able to sustain that, because it's a sustainable entrepreneurial business, is often overlooked in the community. And we're working with entrepreneurs in ADHD, and I think there's something more to bring out, is how does being an entrepreneur, or do you still see yourself as an entrepreneur now? Is the podcast so established now that it's not entrepreneurial, or do you still think the work that you're doing with that is entrepreneurial? What would you say?
I think a consequence of the obsession is that the podcast has grown into a business. So I guess therefore, by definition, I am an entrepreneur, but I didn't ever consider myself to be a business person when I started LADBible. I didn't consider myself to be a business person when I started ADHD Chatter in my bedroom. But a consequence of that obsession and that inability to switch off and think about anything else from wake to sleep, of course that's going to mean that thing is going to do well and turn into a business.
But there's an evolution as well, isn't it? Because you've got to stay current, relevant. The thought you give to the guests, we were talking earlier, and I find that intriguing and fascinating. But that's also stimulation for you. But I'd love to know, because you've built really engaging community. And again, I use that word, educational element that you bring to it. But going back to what you were saying about the dopamine hit, what stimulates you? the most from doing the podcast?
I think it takes the pressure off my inner critic. I think, if I'm brutally honest, and having spoken to other successful ADHD entrepreneurs, like you're not always driven by an intrinsic like motivation for the goal. You're almost just trying to silence a voice inside of you that says you're not good enough. And I think that comes from the years and years of being told that you're not good enough by the school system, by the community, by friends, whoever it might be. And for me, subconsciously, I think that is what compels me to get out of bed as soon as I open my eyes and put steps in place to progress the business. It's what makes sitting down and watching a film so impossible for me, because when I'm not doing something that is putting steps in place to grow the business, I feel like the voice comes back. I feel like I'm driven by stress, and driven by a deep insecurity to prove someone wrong. And I think that's often the case with lots of ADHD entrepreneurs. I think that's okay, as long as you understand where that becomes healthy and not healthy, and you can recognize when you're teetering on burnout. Because if you just go fifth gear as a stress as a driver, and you just don't take your foot off the pedal because you're so terrified of that voice, the volume of that voice going up, then you can really get into risky territory there at that juncture.
There's a really interesting perspective to pick out of what you've just said. And I think it's another separator of ADHD entrepreneurial skills from others. And if I may, if I've got this wrong, I please do tell me. You exited a business and you exited well. Yeah, it was a good result for you. A lot of people would just think, that's it, cracked it. Got my pension plan at the age of whatever that was.
Don't need to work again.
Your inner demon is saying you've still got to qualify yourself, you've still got to prove, you've still got to, which is different to neurotypical, and therefore you've gone again. And I suggest that if you exited this one, it'd be very harder to exit this one because it's built around you, but you'd go again, wouldn't you? Because you have to go again. You have to. And when we look at entrepreneurs that we know and we're talking with, I'd never made that link before. A lot of people who are, I knew of somebody who'd done incredibly well, and when they sold their business and exited, they were set for life financially, and therefore they never did anything again. But the ADHD entrepreneur, I suspect, and you just illuminated that very, very well, will go again, because you have to go again. Because if not, you're not going to sit down and watch a film for 2 hours, are you? That's never, money in the bank is never going to give you the capability or desire to sit down and watch a film for 2 hours. You're going to want to satisfy that inner chimp. You're going to want to prove to yourself that you are good enough, and you are going to be an entrepreneur again.
You've also learned not to try and start too many plates spinning, which is something I need to learn from it, where you don't sort of go, this is going, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this. So actually, if someone made you an offer to buy the podcast off you for just the money you couldn't refuse, brilliant, and so on. But would you, because actually you're enjoying it so much, you're so stimulated, you're getting the dopamine hit, you're building a community, or would you consider selling to then ultimately instantly need to have a fulfillment and start something else? I'm not necessarily asking you that, I'm sort of just generalizing the fact that that's probably where your brain's at.
Yeah, when I sold the social media companies, I did a quick calculation. Okay, annual costs to live, have fun for the rest of my life. Okay, I'm never going to have to work again. But the inner child doesn't care about money.
Absolutely.
That's the differentiating factor. The inner child is driven by an insecurity of trying to prove something to someone. I've spoken to psychiatrists on this, and they said that it's really risky territory for an ADHD entrepreneur to go to therapy and to work on their inner child. So that she's seen case studies where people have done that and they've done the work, they've healed, and then they've lost their drive.
Yeah.
Because they feel like enough, and they don't feel like they need to push hard.
Ambition and drive is good. With the success of the podcast comes a certain amount of, not expectation, but you're in a position where you really do have a huge amount of people that you interact with. You put a post out and there's so many people that resonate with what you're saying, what the guests are saying, and you position it because your skill is social media, you know how to present that, you know how to put it out there. Do you feel any pressure or desire to try and therefore influence any changes that you can see are needed and actually come from a position of influence, whether that would be government lobbying or trying to sort of implement stuff in the education system? Is that in your brain at all?
I would like to change the name. I think ADHD as a name is very weighted to the negative. We have to acknowledge the struggles that come with a brain that thinks differently. But I think the disorder is too negative. And if anything, I would quite like for the next generation of people that come through and get assessed or diagnosed that the name has changed to something that isn't so weighted to the negative. But having said that, I think ADHD is recognizable. Everyone knows what those 4 letters mean. So if the name did suddenly change, it would throw a grenade of confusion into the community, which might, in the short term, do a lot of damage. So I think it's a tipping point. But ultimately, over time, and maybe it would be a gradual process, I think the name to reflect the nuances of the condition and to not make it overarchingly negative would be a good thing.
I think you raise a really interesting point, which, if I can be bold enough to challenge one thing, is when you say that people recognise what it is because the name, I've been in 23 years, I've been working in ADHD, and I promise you 23 years ago that was not the case. People did not know. But to go back and support, is the name relevant? And we've discussed this on camera and we've discussed it off camera. Of course, you talk about very eloquently rejection sensitivity, and we talk about other aspects of ADHD, which the classic NHS application of the DSM-5 go nowhere near. And some of the greatest impairments that come from having ADHD are not about attention and hyperactivity and impulsivity. They are actually about managing rejection, being sensitive, and that fear, that anxiety and presentation of depression that comes from not understanding self and being misunderstood. And I think the label doesn't capture that bit. It's people like you with the massive following you have that have brought and are bringing awareness of rejection sensitivity. It's not about inattention, it's about focus. So the community is understanding it because the community is helping itself understand it. The classic definition and the classic health modelling globally is not helping us to understand it. And TV, media, social media now, I believe, has a huge role to play in helping people to actually understand it. If we called it big speaker with no foam on the front, as long as people understand that one of the greatest things is rejection, it is an inability to regulate emotion when pushed into a corner, way beyond the norm. It isn't about the young boy throwing a chair at a teacher. It is all these complexities. So I think the community has defined how to learn it. And people like yourself are helping people understand. I actually think the manual that dictates the name has no bearing anymore. I think it's out of date. I think DSM-5, we've got to bring out DSM-6 and talk about the things that you talk about daily as being what ADHD is all about.
There's an outpouring of people that come
absolutely
to the podcast, and what did you call school again? A trauma chamber?
Trauma factory.
Trauma factory.
Yeah,
I hated school.
Yeah,
my children are struggling at school, so that really hits home. That now you've built a community where so many people can say, that's how school was for me. Their children are going to school now. Their children are not enjoying it because this one size fits all doesn't. And that's where I was going with the whole. Do you feel like you could actually, because there's a lot of talk, right? But actually, can this be positioned into like whoever needs to be listening at government level, at rulemaking level, to go, okay, we can really see now because of awareness that's been raised and because the community have spoken, we need to change it.
Like I'll take that back to your podcast if I can. I've got 2 questions. Who's the worst person you've ever had on and why? What didn't go well for you in an interview? And who have you never had that you want?
Well, I won't answer the first question on camera. Who have I never had on? I think Gabor Mate, well, he is coming on in October.
Oh, well done. Trauma.
I think I can't. I'd love to have Ned Hallowell, who has been on, and Gabor together. but trying to get that scheduling would be. Gabor's in London for one.
Having them both separately is a good scenario.
Yeah.
But yeah, Gabor matters. But I'm really leaning into like the academics, and the clinical experts who, I think people come to ADHD Chatter because they have had a lifetime of being misunderstood, and they don't understand why they struggle in certain areas, but also excel in other areas that people find challenging. And I think they come for answers. And I think ADHD Chatter is very much a good source of that information. I totally agree with the trauma factor. The school is a trauma factory for ADHD kids. And I think I would love for the government to give more money to schools who can then so teachers can have more resources to do more. Because so many teachers want to help. They understand the situation. They understand the different conditions. They understand how they present a lot of the time. But there is a budget issue and it's a resource issue. So I'd love to lobby for more funding for schools to be able to do more. I think having a dialogue between teachers and parents is like a really fundamental first step.
And that costs nothing. We at 360, we wrote a school guide for ADHD in the classroom, in the policies and in the leadership. So stratifying what good ADHD looks like in a school. And when we sat down and reviewed it, it's absolutely got nothing to do with ADHD at the end of the day. It's about providing meaningful education for everybody. And actually, it is not an argument about neurodiversity and neurospiciness in school. It's actually an argument about, let's just do education properly, where it's not about what is right for the education system, SATs, this, that, or the other. It's actually what's right for the child entering the room. And some of those changes actually don't cost them a lot of money. And you know, it's an interesting thing in we were in this business through COVID. And of course, school stopped and kids were home taught. Do you remember those whole horrible days of, you'll have gone through it with your kids, rarely with my kids, they were through it. We identified two sets of kids there. And I think this becomes really important with the debate we're engaging in. There was one set of kids that really enjoyed being at home. There was none of that bullying, none of that trauma, none of that not being understood. They were in a safe space and they were trying to learn in a safe space. And if that had been organised and manufactured better, they'd have been really, really productive. There was another group who missed the comradeship, the fellowship, the liveliness of being around other people and all of that energy. And when we started to coach schools, as kids came back to school, we were saying to teachers, recognise you've got two massive subsets of kids in here, and somehow you've got to achieve something for both of them at the same time. And I think that's the greatest difficulty facing education is we try and treat everybody as the same, and we can't educate everybody as the same. And even without getting too scientific about it, there were two groups. Now, I think neurosensitivity plays into those two groups. There's one type of ADHD that really wants to be around other people and really enjoys that, but wants to be taught compassionately around there. And there's another set where perhaps the autistic tendencies are stronger, that wants to be actually not in a group, being forced to be in a group, being forced to be lively, being forced to be at front, blah, blah, blah. And I actually think we can even just learn from what we saw in the pandemic to change the way we look at education. And I would argue some of that doesn't even need money. It just needs people to start thinking differently. And we don't do that. We waste money, don't we?
100%.
You know, I think you're right. It needs to change. It absolutely needs to change. But my point being, I don't think we can give government and give teachers and boards of governors, I don't think we can afford to give them the excuse of hiding behind we haven't got the money. Because thinking differently costs nothing.
So if it wasn't money, if it's not money, what can we do? You've got huge influence, you've got huge reach. We're talking to lots of people. What can we do to influence change?
I'd love to see us. You've got incredible reach. We've got reach, trying to get a discussion at ministerial level.
So it's government led.
I think we shouldn't be frightened to take on the government. And I mean that in the most productive way. I don't mean that instead of banners outside Downing Street. I actually mean, can we get them in a room and start to get them to listen to this stuff that we talk about? Because we're just not getting them there. we're not, are we? We're just. You've had some ministers on, haven't you? And we're just not there with that level of influence. But I don't think that we got to wrap out now. But I think should that be part of the overall mission of the ADHD community, of the media-based ADHD community? Why not? Why not keep striving for
That's
it?
probably what aligns us all, isn't it? You know, you said before we started filming, you put an episode out that is flying in your ways. That means lots of people are engaging in that, watching it, listening, and commenting. That's that whole raising of awareness. What this does, going out on Bloomberg, getting people to understand. You know, Trauma Factory cannot call a school that. You know, in 2025,
Can't legitimise that, can
you
we?
know, that's just, it's archaic.
Yeah.
It's our kids.
Maybe we should film something in the halls of the Palace of Westminster. Maybe we should go and sit and do this in the Palace of Westminster and be ballsy.
You in?
Let's do it. Let's
Do it. There you go.
There you go.
Good way to wrap. Alex, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for the invitation.